First of all, I want to thank the organizers of this conference and the members of the European Parliament for possibility to speak there, because it's very important thing for our movement and for, I think, future of our people. I would like to start with one of the most important things for understanding, namely the identification of the main problem. The problem that led to the war going on now. The problem that has caused dozens of wars in the past and will cause dozens of wars in the future until this problem is not solved. And this problem is the imperial format of Russian statehood. Many Western politicians and so-called Russian opposition do not understand this problem, and they think that they can ensure security in Europe and bring prosperity in Russia just by simply removing Putin. But the problem is not Putin. His regime is just a new manifestation of this problem. A week ago was the 104th anniversary of the genocide of the Cossack people, during which hundreds of thousands of our tribesmen were killed. And this genocide was carried out by the Soviet regime. Also, the Russian Empire, as it expanded in size, new territories, carried out genocides of native peoples and began a total policy of Russification and assimilation, the destruction of the cultural and national identity of small peoples. This policy continued in the Soviet Union, and it still continues to this day. It is possible to make the erroneous assumption that the problem can be solved by establishment of a democratic regime in Moscow, while maintaining a unified Russian state. But there was already a historical experience of establishing such a regime. Under Yeltsin's rule, whom the West loved as the democratic president of free Russia, a war began against the Chechen people. Under Medvedev, when the Russian Federation had not yet had time to finally transform into a totalitarian state, the war began against Georgia. The democratic regime in Moscow, even if it does have democratic institutions, it's always just a mask under which the imperial essence of this state is hidden. With the fall of the Putin regime, the problem will not be solved if Russian statehood is preserved in the imperial format. The problems of indigenous peoples will not be resolved. They will also be in the position of the oppressed under democratic power of Moscow, so-called. Many of them will cease to exist as ethnic groups if they do not revive or create their sovereign states in the near future. Europe, in this case, will get a new war in a few years or decades as soon as Russia accumulates enough forces to start this war. But I must also say that the West is also partly responsible for establishment of Putin's regime. In the 90s, where the West helped Moscow to preserve the integrity of the Russian Empire within its current borders, the West recognized these borders. The West contributed to the concentration of the nuclear arsenal of the former Soviet Union in the hands of Moscow. The West did nothing when Russian tanks were driving through the territory of the Chechen Republic, through the territory of Georgia. The West bought from Russia natural resources stolen from indigenous peoples. The West allowed Putin to occupy Crimea. The effort to stop this activity or conduct the West allowed Russia to carry out its propaganda on the territory of the European Union and not effort to stop this activity or conduct counter-propaganda of the territory of Russia. And this is the reason why a lot of people now in Russia, common people, they support Putin and they really think that Europe is their enemy. Now the West paying for these mistakes, and also for these mistakes now paying Ukraine, but Ukrainian people pays for this by their own lives of their citizens. And I hope these mistakes will not be repeated in the future, because only in this case we will achieve freedom for indigenous peoples and security for all the Europe. Now I want to tell about our project of the state of Cossackia. The Cossack people if the Cossack people do not find the independent state in the coming years, they most likely will be no another chance for this. And our people will gradually decrease in number and lose their identity. and will be assimilated by other peoples, by Russians, and therefore only the revival of our state can save our people. Due to its geographical location, climate, resources, agriculture and industry, this state has every chance of being developed and prosperous. I would like to note the geopolitical importance of this region, which is the shortest road from Europe to Asia. Ancient trade routes passed here, and with the appearance of new states here, trade in this way can be resumed, which will be the benefit both for the local population and for the whole Europe. Also, in the perspective of post-Russia, the Don River will become the most important transport artery because it's connected by a canal with the Volga, which flows through the most of the future states of Idel-Urals and the present-day Central Russia, and also has access to the Caspian Sea. Through the Sea of Azov, the transportation of goods will go to the Black and Mediterranean seas and possibly even to the oceans. In the south, this region goes to the borders of Western Asia. Through the future states of the Kuban, Circassia and Northern Caucasus, there will also possibility for trade relationship. And there's one more thing I want to say. This is a joint appeal to the European Parliament from our movement and from our allied organization, All Cossacks Public Center. In the United States, on July 17, 1959, the Enslaved Nations Act number PL 8619 was passed. The law stated that the policy of the Communist Russia led to the enslavement and the deprivation of the national independence of Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine, Belarus, Armenia, Georgia, Turkestan, Azerbaijan, Idel-Ural, Cossackia and the other nations. That is, the Cossacks will recognize the right to be called people with the right to their own statehood and traditional self-government. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, almost all the peoples listed in this law gained independence. But the Cossackia specified in this legal act did not appear. And the Cossacks are still not recognized in Russian Federation as a people and are not included in the general classifier of the peoples of their country. Nevertheless, in Russia, on April 26, 1991, the law on the rehabilitation of repressed peoples was adopted, where among other nations it was said about the Cossacks and the obligation of the state to recognize the fact of illegal repression against them and to carry out legal territorial and material rehabilitation. That is the obligation of the government to return the Cossacks people its full subjectivity and compensate for all that losses was announced. But for 32 years this law has not been implemented in the slightest, despite the numerous requests and demands of the Cossacks. Therefore, we, the Cossacks, appeal to the European Parliament with the request to adopt a resolution on the recognition of the Cossacks as people entitled to their own statehood with the establishment of the traditional broad Cossack self-government. And besides, in a short time, to apply the European Union member states to adopt legal acts similar to the American law PL 8690 in their countries. And at the end of my speech, I want to say that for our common victory, it is necessary to actively support the struggle of peoples for freedom at all levels. It is necessary to support the liberation movements with resources, media, information, money, recognition, legitimization, and if it will be necessary in the future, with the weapons. And of course, it is necessary to continue supporting Ukraine. The very fact that this conference is being held today within the walls of the European Parliament suggests that the West is beginning to realize its past mistakes, and it's necessary to continue working in this direction. We must achieve our common victory because we can't and you can't negotiate with Putin or any Russian imperial government. You can't succumb to their attempts to bribe Europe. You can't trust their promises. Only in this way will enslaved peoples gain freedom. Only in this way will the genocide be stopped. Only in this way peace will come to Europe, instead just a temporary truce. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Actually, I try to stay absolutely neutral as moderator, yet I'm also a witness of history to some extent. So I have to transfer part of my knowledge to add to your contribution. Well, we nations and countries of Central and Eastern Europe now within the EU and NATO are part, surely we consider ourselves part of the collective West. And it is us, together probably with the United States, pushing the rest of the West to help Ukraine in really intense manner. What is needed: arms, munition, money, technical assistance. Same, exactly the same, was done in 2008 when Russia invaded Georgia. Now we call war of Russia on Ukraine unprovoked and unjustified. At that time, majority of the West, that is true, tried to portray the invasion of Georgia as provoked by then President of Georgia and elites, and eventually, in silence, justified. There were 5 leaders of Central and Eastern Europe under full cooperation with the US President at that time, George W. Bush, President of Central and Eastern Europe, led by my late friend and boss, the late President Lech Kaczynski, with participation of the Ukrainian President as well, Viktor Yushchenko, going there and preventing eventual capturing of Tbilisi. Of course, it did not prevent capturing of 20% of Georgia, yet it was possible to rescue the most important things. President Saakashvili is now in prison in very dangerous state, and we have to defend him. 2 years after this war and trip of presidents to Tbilisi, President Kaczynski was dead. In Smolensk catastrophe, there is still silence around this. So remember, it's not only those who are not protected, but also protectors. God knows what's happening to them. So it's not, now we maintain with greater force, also in memory to the late President Lech Kaczynski, to exert more force probably, but alliance is the same and leaders are similar. Thank you.